You were never useful. You were merely convenient. Damon Prescott's voice carried across the red hollow gathering hall, leaving no corner untouched. Grace Whitmore stood beneath the carved silver crest while the entire pack watched him discard 6 years of promises with one sentence. Snow pressed against the tall windows. Lanterns burned along the stone walls. At the center table lay the moon path map she had spent 3 winters completing, now covered in symbols she had never drawn. Damon placed one hand on the false route and looked at her as though the lie belonged to her. Because of your failure, Red Hollow lost access to the northern trade passage. A murmur moved through the crowd. Grace recognized hunters she had guided through mountain fog, families whose supply routes she had corrected, and scouts who had once trusted her judgment without question. Not one met her eyes. Beside Damon stood Victoria Lane in a dark red ceremonial gown, already wearing the silver chain reserved for a future Luna. Her expression held practiced concern. Grace may have meant well, Victoria said, but good intentions cannot protect a pack. Grace looked down at the map. The western ridge had been shifted by nearly 2 miles. A crescent marker had been turned upside down, and beside the narrow passage into Silvercrest territory, someone had added her signature. The forgery was careful, almost perfect. I did not draw this route, Grace said. Damon gave a tired smile, as if her truth were an inconvenience. Then you are careless as well as useless. The words landed harder because Luke Bennett stood near the council steps. He had seen the original map. He had carried it to Damon's private chamber 3 nights earlier. Grace looked at him. Luke's jaw tightened. His hands closed at his sides. Then he lowered his head. Silence. Again, Damon lifted the thin silver bond chain from Grace's shoulders. Red Hollow requires a Luna who brings strength, not excuses. He placed the chain around Victoria's neck while the hall watched. Grace felt the humiliation rise around her like cold water, but beneath it came something clearer. The certainty that this had been arranged long before she entered the room. Damon had not discovered a mistake. He had created one. Leave through the servant's door, he ordered. A few pack members shifted uneasily. Grace did not move toward the side corridor. She bent, picked up the altered map, and folded it once. Damon's expression hardened. Did you hear me? I heard every word. Her voice did not tremble. She reached inside her sleeve and touched the narrow strip of parchment hidden against her wrist. The true fragment. The one showing a secret moon path crossing into Silvercrest land. The one Damon believed had already been destroyed. At the far end of the hall, the Silvercrest delegation sat beneath black and silver banners. At its center was Alexander Blackwell, the rival Alpha King. 41. Broad-shouldered. Silent. His silver-gray eyes had not left Grace since Damon first spoke. Red Hollow feared him because he never raised his voice to prove he had power. He simply waited until lies exhausted themselves. Grace stepped away from the council table. Damon smiled, believing she had finally obeyed. Then she walked past the servant's door, past the pack elders, past Victoria's satisfied stare, straight toward Alexander. The hall fell silent enough for Grace to hear the soft sweep of her gown across the stone floor. She stopped before the rival king and lifted the folded map. Your Majesty, she said, Red Hollow is preparing to cross your border using a stolen moon path. Damon surged to his feet. She is confused. Remove her. Grace pulled the hidden parchment from her sleeve and placed it in Alexander's hand. His gaze moved across the marks once. Then again. The warmth drained from his expression. Grace had not eaten since the previous morning. She had slept less than 2 hours in 3 days. The room tilted, but she forced herself to remain standing. The path is unstable, she whispered, and they are planning to move families through it under the red moon. Damon's command echoed behind her, but it sounded distant now. Grace took one step back. Her knees weakened. Before she reached the floor, Alexander rose and caught her carefully against his chest. One arm steadied her shoulders while the other kept the map safe between them. Damon laughed from across the hall. Congratulations, Blackwell. You have just claimed Red Hollow's most useless Omega. Alexander looked at the false map, then at the exhaustion hidden beneath Grace's calm face. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet enough to make everyone listen. If she is useless, why did you work so hard to silence her? Alexander did not release Grace until he felt her balance return. Even then, he kept one hand near her elbow, close enough to help, but careful not to hold her without permission. The Red Hollow hall remained silent. Damon stood behind the council table with anger tightening his face, while Victoria's fingers closed around the silver Luna chain at her throat. Grace could feel every eye on her. Only minutes earlier, they had watched her humiliation. Now they were watching the rival king protect the woman they had called useless. "She is no witness," Damon said. "She is a rejected Omega trying to punish this pack." Alexander unfolded the hidden strip of parchment. The marks were precise, drawn in Grace's familiar hand. A silver crescent indicated the moon path. A red circle marked the coming lunar shift. Along the eastern edge, the route crossed directly into Silvercrest territory. "This document concerns my border," Alexander said. "That makes her testimony relevant." Damon stepped down from the raised platform. "That fragment belongs to Red Hollow." Grace straightened. The room still tilted slightly, but her voice remained steady. "The map belongs to the person who drew it." A quiet murmur moved through the hall. Damon ignored it. "You were ordered to surrender every copy." "I surrendered every copy you knew about." Luke lifted his head at last. Grace saw fear in his expression, but also recognition. He understood what the fragment could prove. 3 nights earlier, he had carried the original map into Damon's private chamber. By morning, Grace's symbols had been altered and her signature copied onto the false route. Luke knew. He still said nothing. Alexander turned the parchment toward the lantern light. "Why is the path marked unstable?" Grace drew a slow breath. "Moon paths shift with mineral pressure and lunar pull. Under the red moon, the western shelf will narrow. By midnight, the passage may no longer support wagons." Several pack members exchanged worried looks. Red Hollow families were expected to relocate toward the northern valley before winter deepened. Damon had announced the journey as an expansion opportunity. Grace now understood the truth. They were being moved through a route he knew was dangerous because it allowed him to cross Silvercrest land without permission. "She is guessing," Victoria said. Grace looked at her. "Then show him the original map." Victoria's face changed for less than a second. It was enough. Alexander noticed. So did Luke. Damon moved between them. "This gathering is over." "No," Alexander said. He did not raise his voice, yet the single word stopped the room. "A possible border violation has been presented before royal witnesses. Under the Northern Accord, the evidence must be examined." Damon's smile disappeared. "You do not rule Red Hollow. I rule Silvercrest. Your proposed route crosses my land." Alexander handed the fragment to his chief advisor, who sealed it inside a leather case. "Grace Whitmore is now a protected royal witness until the claim is reviewed." The declaration changed the air. Damon could no longer order her detained without openly challenging Silvercrest law. Grace felt relief, but it came with another emotion she could not name. After years of being spoken over, someone had protected her right to speak without claiming the truth as his own. Damon looked at her as if she had betrayed him. "You would leave with our enemy?" Grace glanced around the hall. She saw the hunters who had followed her maps, the elders who had praised her judgment in private, and the families now realizing they might have been sent into the mountains under false directions. "I am leaving with the evidence," she said. "You made yourself its enemy." Alexander removed his black cloak and offered it to her. He did not place it around her shoulders. He simply waited. Grace accepted it. The wool carried warmth from the fire and the faint scent of pine. "Where do you want to go?" he asked. The question surprised her. Damon had spent years telling her where to stand, what to draw, and when to remain silent. Alexander had known her for less than 10 minutes, yet he asked. Grace looked toward the main doors. "Somewhere the map can be examined honestly." Then Silvercrest. He offered his arm. She took it by choice. Together they crossed the hall while the Red Hollow pack watched. At the doorway, a small figure slipped from behind an elder. Emily Carter held a rolled parchment against her chest. The 9-year-old Omega met Grace's eyes and shook her head slightly, warning her not to stop. Grace understood. Emily still had something Damon had failed to find. Outside, snow covered the courtyard in white silence. As Alexander helped Grace into the royal carriage, he looked once more at the sealed fragment. "You said families are moving through the pass." "At least 40 wagons," Grace replied. When she looked toward the red glow beginning to rise behind the mountains. "Tomorrow night." The royal carriage moved through the winter road while the red moon climbed behind the mountains. Grace sat beneath Alexander's black cloak, watching Silvercrest torches appear between the pines. 40 wagons. Families. Children. Elders. People who believed Damon was leading them towards safety. By tomorrow night, they could be trapped inside a narrowing pass. Alexander sat across from her, one hand resting near the sealed map case. He had not asked her to repeat the story. He had not questioned whether exhaustion made her confused. He simply believed the evidence deserved examination. How long until the path becomes unstable, he asked. The first shift begins near sunset. The western shelf will weaken as the red moon rises. And the safest route? There is another passage 3 miles south, but Damon dismissed it because it does not cross Silvercrest land. Alexander's expression hardened. So the dangerous route gives him territory. Grace nodded. The carriage entered Silvercrest just before dawn. Black stone towers rose above a frozen river, their windows glowing amber against the snow. Servants gathered beneath the entrance arch, but Alexander stopped them before anyone approached her. She is a royal witness, not a prisoner, he said. No questions until she has eaten and rested. Grace almost told him she could begin immediately. The words reached her lips and failed. She had spent 3 days being watched, doubted, and denied food whenever she refused to confess. Her body had carried her far enough. Alexander seemed to understand without making her explain. He led her to a quiet guest room overlooking the river, then remained near the doorway. You may lock this door from the inside, he said. No one enters without your permission. Grace looked at him. Not even you. Especially not me. The answer stayed with her after he left. A warm meal waited beside the fireplace. Bread, soup, apples. Nothing extravagant. Nothing demanding gratitude. Grace ate slowly, then slept for several hours without dreaming of altered maps. When she woke, a silver-haired scholar named Evelyn Harper waited in the adjoining study. Every parchment lay beneath clear glass weights. The sealed fragment rested at the center. Alexander stood across the room, leaving Grace the place nearest the maps. May I examine your markings? Evelyn asked. Grace agreed. The scholar studied the crescent symbols, mineral lines, and red lunar circle. Then she compared them with Silvercrest geological records. She is correct, Evelyn said. The western shelf has shifted almost 4 feet since autumn. Under tomorrow night's lunar pressure, the passage could narrow before the wagons reach the center. Alexander looked toward the southern route. Can it carry 40 wagons? Yes, Grace answered. If they leave before noon and travel in groups of 10. Evelyn traced another symbol near the border. This mark indicates an older moon path beneath Red Hollow land. Grace leaned closer. She had seen the symbol only once, hidden beneath Damon's false corrections. That path leads to the northern valley. And it never crosses Silvercrest, Evelyn said. The truth settled heavily. Damon had never needed the dangerous route. He chose it because crossing Silvercrest would allow him to claim the disputed valley afterward. He was using the families as witnesses to an occupation, Grace whispered. Alexander's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. Then we warn them. One of his advisors hesitated. If Damon refuses, his failure will expose him without Silvercrest intervention. Grace turned sharply. People are not evidence. Alexander looked at her, and something quiet changed in his silver-gray eyes. Agreed. He ordered riders sent with copies of the safe route, medical supplies, and neutral observers. No soldiers. No threat. Only proof. Grace watched royal messengers leave through the eastern gate. You could let him destroy his own reputation, she said. A king who needs innocent people to suffer before he can prove he was right is not worth following. The words struck deeper than she expected. Damon had always spoken of power as something taken. Alexander treated it as responsibility. Evelyn returned to the false map and lifted one corner. Beneath the forged signature, she found a faint mark impressed into the parchment. A seal used only by Red Hollow's council chamber. This alteration was not made by one person, she said. Grace stared at the seal. Damon had lied. Victoria had helped. But someone else in the council had approved it. Before she could ask who, a guard entered carrying a small rolled parchment tied with blue thread. A child from Red Hollow left this at the eastern checkpoint, he said. Grace recognized the knot immediately. Emily. She opened the roll and found the original map, untouched, with one message written across the bottom. They are leaving before sunrise. Grace read Emily's message twice. The words were written in a child's careful hand, but the urgency behind them was unmistakable. They are leaving before sunrise. Alexander crossed the study in 3 steps and opened the palace doors. Send riders to the southern road. Carry copies of the safe route. No weapons drawn. No challenge to Red Hollow authority unless civilians are placed in immediate danger. His captain bowed and left. Grace spread the original map across the table beside the altered one. The difference was no longer subtle. Victoria had shifted the western shelf, erased the southern passage, and copied Grace's signature beneath a route that crossed Silvercrest land. Near the bottom, Emily had marked a tiny blue star beside an abandoned shepherd station. She wants us to meet her there, Grace said. Evelyn examined the symbol. The station is 6 miles from Red Hollow's eastern gate. Alexander looked toward the pale light beyond the windows. We can reach it before the first wagons. Grace began rolling the maps. I am coming. You have slept only a few hours. Those families know Damon. They do not know your riders. If Silvercrest blocks the road, he will tell them it is an invasion. Alexander did not argue. Then you speak first. The answer surprised her again. Damon had always treated her knowledge as useful only when it supported his decisions. Alexander gave her authority because the truth required her voice. They left Silvercrest beneath a fading night sky. Grace rode inside the carriage with Evelyn while Alexander and the royal escort traveled beside them. No banners flew above the group. No drums announced their approach. By the time they reached the shepherd station, the eastern horizon had turned silver. Emily waited behind the weathered wooden building with 2 travel bags and a wool cap pulled low over her ears. Grace stepped down before the carriage fully stopped. The girl ran toward her, then halted a few feet away as if uncertain whether she was allowed to come closer. Grace opened her arms. Emily crossed the distance and held her tightly. I took the map from Victoria's desk, she whispered. She said nobody would believe an Omega child. Grace looked at the blue thread tied around the parchment. You believed the truth mattered. Emily nodded against her cloak. The wagons are already moving. Damon told everyone Silvercrest closed the safe road. Alexander's expression changed, but his voice remained controlled. It is open. It has always been open. A low rumble rolled through the valley. Wagon wheels. Grace climbed the small ridge beside the station and saw lanterns moving through the trees. Dozens of families followed the western road, exactly as Damon had planned. Red Hollow riders led the procession. Damon rode at the front with Victoria beside him, both wearing ceremonial red. When he saw the Silvercrest escort, he raised one hand and stopped the wagons. You crossed into Red Hollow territory, he called. Alexander remained on the Silvercrest side of the boundary marker. No, your road crosses mine. Grace stepped forward with the original map visible in her hands. Murmurs moved through the families. Damon's gaze hardened. You have already done enough damage. I am trying to stop it. She placed the original map on a flat stone and held the altered copy beside it. The western shelf will narrow under the red moon. The southern road is safe and remains open. Damon laughed. She lied to you once. Now she lies for him. Grace looked toward the wagons. She recognized parents, elders, and children she had guided through winter routes for years. Do not believe me because I ask, she said. Examine the maps. Compare the council seal. Ask why the safe road was erased. Luke Bennett rode near the 3rd wagon. His face went pale when he saw the original parchment. Damon turned toward him. Say nothing. The command traveled clearly across the cold morning air. Everyone heard it. Luke looked at Grace, then at the families waiting behind him. For the first time, he did not lower his head. The original map is hers, he said. I carried it to Damon's chamber 3 nights ago. Victoria's hand tightened around her reins. Damon stared at his beta as though silence still belonged to him. Luke continued. By morning, the route had been changed. A frightened murmur spread through the procession. Then the mountain answered with a deep, distant groan. Snow slid from the western ridge in a long white line. Evelyn looked toward the sky. The lunar pressure is beginning early. Grace turned to the families. If you enter that pass now, you may not be able to leave it. Damon pointed toward the western road. Move forward. No wagon moved. One driver slowly turned his horses south. Then another followed. Damon watched his authority break one choice at a time. But before the final wagon could turn, Victoria leaned toward him and whispered something Grace could not hear. Damon looked toward Emily. His face changed. "The child stole council property," he announced. "She returns with us." Emily's fingers closed around Grace's hand. Alexander stepped beside them, calm and immovable. "She will speak before a public hearing." Damon smiled without warmth. "Then let the hearing begin in Red Hollow." Today, the road back to Red Hollow filled with uneasy silence. The families followed the southern route towards safety, guided by Silvercrest riders and Evelyn's copied maps. Grace traveled beside Emily in the royal carriage while Alexander rode near the window, never far enough to lose sight of them. Damon and Victoria led the smaller group toward the pack hall, calling the return a public hearing. Grace knew better. Damon believed the walls of Red Hollow still belonged to him. He believed familiarity could turn truth into obedience. When the eastern gate opened, the same wolves who had watched Grace leave gathered beneath the silver crest. Word of the changed route had arrived before them. Mothers whispered about the mountain shift. Hunters compared the original map with the false one. No one cheered when Damon entered. He walked directly to the council platform and ordered Emily brought forward. Grace kept the child beside her. "She speaks only if she chooses," Grace said. Damon looked toward Alexander. "Control your witness." Alexander dismounted slowly. "She is not mine to control." The answer moved through the crowd like a quiet wind. Damon called the hearing to order without waiting for the elders. Victoria placed the altered map on the council table and claimed Grace had created both versions to embarrass Red Hollow. Evelyn stepped forward with the original parchment protected beneath glass. "The ink on this map is 4 months old. The alterations on the other were made 3 nights ago." She pointed to the copied signature, the shifted ridge, and the council seal pressed beneath the false marks. Someone used official access. Victoria's face remained calm, but her breathing changed. Grace noticed because she had spent years observing details others ignored. "The seal was kept in Damon's private chamber," Luke said from the center aisle. Every head turned toward him. Damon's voice sharpened. "You have already forgotten your place." Luke looked at the floor for one brief second. Then he raised his head. "My place should have been beside the truth." He described carrying Grace's map to the Alpha's chamber. He admitted seeing Victoria enter after midnight with the council seal. He admitted remaining silent when Grace was accused because Damon had promised him command of the northern patrols. Grace listened without interrupting. His honesty did not erase his silence, but it gave the pack something it had lacked for years. A witness willing to accept the cost of speaking. Damon dismissed the confession as jealousy. Then Emily lifted her small hand. "I saw Victoria burn the practice copies." The hall became still. Grace knelt beside her. "You do not have to say more." Emily looked at Damon, then at the wolves surrounding her. "I want to." She explained how she had hidden the original map after hearing Victoria say Grace would be blamed if the route failed. She repeated the words exactly. Damon would gain the valley either way. If the crossing succeeded, Red Hollow would claim Silvercrest land. If it failed, Grace would carry the blame. A council elder rose slowly. "Did you plan to move our families through an unstable pass?" Damon's expression hardened. "Leadership requires risks." "Risks accepted by whom?" Grace asked. She approached the table and placed the safe southern route beside the false one. "You did not tell them the truth. You used their trust as cover for a border claim." Victoria stepped away from Damon. "He said the shelf would hold." Damon turned toward her. The single sentence broke their alliance. Evelyn opened a second record found inside the map tube. It showed payments from Red Hollow's border treasury to private surveyors who had warned Damon about the unstable ridge. He had known for weeks. The elders began calling for his authority to be suspended until a full council review. Damon looked toward Alexander as though expecting the rival king to seize the moment. Alexander remained beside Grace. "Silvercrest will recognize whatever lawful decision Red Hollow makes after every record is public," he said. "I did not come to choose your leader." Grace understood then why Damon feared him. Alexander's strength did not need chaos. It left people free enough to see who had created it. The council voted to remove Damon from control of the border routes and place Victoria's Luna appointment on hold. A formal hearing would follow under neutral observation. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Damon stopped Grace beneath the crest. "You think this makes you important?" he asked quietly. Grace looked at the map that had once defined her worth in his eyes. "No, it proves I was important before you admitted it." Behind her, Alexander waited without reaching for her. Then Evelyn unfolded one final section of the original map. Beneath the red moon symbol, a silver line had appeared where no ink had been visible before. It curved away from Red Hollow and ended at the gates of Silvercrest. Alexander's wolf stirred in recognition. Grace felt the same impossible pull beneath her ribs. The moon path was not only marking a road, it was marking a bond. The silver line on the map brightened beneath the red moon, then settled into the parchment like a path, remembering where it belonged. Grace stared at it while the noise of the gathering hall faded around her. She had studied moon paths since childhood. She knew how mineral shifts revealed hidden roads, how lunar pressure changed mountain passages, and how old maps sometimes responded to bloodlines or territory. She had never seen one mark a bond between two people. Evelyn leaned closer without touching the parchment. This is not a border route. Alexander remained beside Grace, perfectly still. Only the faint silver in his eyes revealed that his wolf had recognized the truth before either of them spoke. Grace felt the pull beneath her ribs again. Warm, steady, nothing like Damon's demands or Red Hollow's expectations. It did not push her toward Alexander. It simply made his presence impossible to ignore. Damon noticed the silence between them and gave a bitter laugh. Of course, Blackwell finds a useful omega, and suddenly destiny appears. Grace looked at him. Destiny did not alter the map. Perhaps Silvercrest did. Evelyn straightened. The line appeared only after the original route was restored and the truth was publicly acknowledged. Moon paths respond to alignment, not manipulation. Damon stepped closer to the table, but the council elders moved between him and the evidence. His authority had already begun to vanish. Alexander could have announced the bond before the entire pack. He could have used it to humiliate Damon or strengthen Silvercrest's claim over Grace. Instead, he folded the map carefully and placed it in Grace's hands. This belongs to you. She searched his face. You felt it too. Yes. His answer was honest and quiet. Then why did you say nothing? Because a bond is not permission. The words reached the wolves standing nearest them. Grace saw surprise move across their faces. Red Hollow had always taught that rank created rights, and destiny created ownership. Alexander treated both as responsibility. You decide what it means, he continued. You decide whether it means anything at all. Grace held the map against her chest. The pull remained, but now it carried room to breathe. Before she could answer, one of the border scouts rushed into the hall. The final wagons never reached the southern road. The relief in the room disappeared. Luke stepped forward. How many? 7. Damon's private guards redirected them toward the Old Moon path before the council vote. Every gaze turned toward Damon. His expression did not change, but Victoria moved farther away from him. They were ordered to secure the northern valley, he said. The shelf is already shifting, Evelyn warned. If they enter the narrow section, the wagons could be stranded before nightfall. Grace spread the map again. The red lunar symbol had moved closer to the western ridge. They have less than 3 hours. Alexander looked toward his captain. Prepare guides and medical wagons. An advisor lowered his voice. Your Majesty, allowing Red Hollow families to become trapped would prove Damon ignored every warning. Grace felt the old anger rise, but Alexander answered before she could. People are not lessons. He turned to Grace. Can you guide us through the southern cut and reach them from the east? She traced the terrain. Yes, but the path separates near the Pine Basin. Only someone who can read the lunar markers will know where to turn. Then you lead. Damon stared at her. You would risk yourself for wolves who let me disgrace you. Grace looked around the hall. Some had remained silent. Some had believed the lie. Others were only now learning how completely they had been deceived. Their silence hurt me, she said. It does not make their children responsible. She handed Emily to the care of a council elder, then gathered the original maps. Alexander did not order her to remain behind. He did not insist on riding ahead. He simply matched her pace as they crossed the courtyard. Within minutes, Silvercrest guides and Red Hollow volunteers assembled beneath the eastern gate. Luke joined them without asking for forgiveness. Evelyn carried the lunar instruments. Grace mounted a calm gray horse and studied the pale line forming across the mountain sky. The hidden path would remain visible for only a few hours. Alexander rode beside her. You do not have to prove anything today, he said. Grace looked toward the distant ridge where 7 families were moving deeper into danger. I am not going to prove my worth. She turned her horse toward the southern cut. I am going because their lives have worth too. The gates opened. Snow swept across the road as Grace led both rival packs toward the mountains. Behind them, Damon called for his remaining guards to stop the expedition, but no one obeyed. Ahead, the red moon rose higher, and the western ridge gave a long, warning groan. Then the silver line on Grace's map split into 2 paths, and one of them began to disappear. Grace watched the silver line fade from the map as the expedition reached the pine basin. Wind moved through the trees, carrying fine snow across the narrow trail. To the west, the original moon path climbed toward the unstable shelf. To the east, a thinner route curved beneath a line of dark cliffs before disappearing into the valley. Evelyn raised the lunar instrument toward the sky. The western path will close first. Luke looked toward the higher trail. The missing wagons were ordered west. Grace studied the ground. Fresh wheel marks crossed the basin, but 2 sets of tracks divided near the frozen creek. Damon's guards had separated the families. 4 wagons had continued toward the western shelf. 3 had turned east. They split them, Grace said. Alexander looked at both trails. Can we reach both groups? Not together. The decision settled over the riders. Grace felt the bond between them, quiet and steady, but Alexander did not use it to guide her choice. Tell me what you need, he said. Grace pointed toward the western trail. Take the stronger horses and reach the 4 wagons before the shelf narrows. Luke knows the old supply road. I will follow the eastern markers with Evelyn and the remaining guides. Alexander's wolf resisted. She saw it in the silver flash of his eyes. Still, he nodded. You lead the eastern group. And you do not turn back for me unless the western families are safe. Agreed. He removed a silver whistle from his coat and offered it to her. 3 calls if the path closes. Grace accepted it. Their hands touched for one brief moment. The bond warmed, but neither claimed more than the moment gave. Then Alexander turned west with Luke and half the riders. Grace led Evelyn and the remaining guides east. The trail narrowed until the horses had to move single file. Lunar symbols appeared on exposed stones, faint as frost. Grace recognized the pattern from maps drawn before Red Hollow existed. This is not the route Damon marked, Evelyn said. It is older and safer, Grace replied. If we follow the blue mineral line. They found the first abandoned wagon near a grove of white pines. A broken wheel had left it leaning beside the trail, but the family had moved on. Small footprints led toward the cliffs. Grace dismounted and followed them. Beyond the grove, 3 wagons waited beneath a stone overhang. Parents held children close while an elderly driver tried to calm the horses. Relief moved through them when they recognized Grace. Damon's guards said the southern route was blocked, one woman explained. Then they left when the path changed. Grace unfolded the map on the wagon bench. The route ahead is safe for another hour, but we must move now. One man looked at the Silvercrest guides. Are we prisoners? No, Grace said. You are going wherever you choose after we leave this mountain. The families began preparing the wagons. Grace showed the drivers how to follow the blue lunar stones and keep 20 feet between each team. She did not command them as Damon would have. She explained the danger and let them understand the path. When the first wagon moved, the ground beneath the overhang gave a low tremor. Snow fell from the cliff edge in a soft curtain. Evelyn looked toward the map. The eastern line is fading faster. Grace guided the final wagon onto the trail. A young mother remained behind, searching the trees. My daughter is missing. Grace's heart tightened. How old? 7. She went to find her blue scarf. The guides offered to search, but the path could not hold the wagons much longer. Grace looked at Evelyn. Take them to the basin. You cannot stay alone. I know the markers. Grace handed her the map copy and took the original. Go. The mother started to protest, but Grace touched her shoulder gently. I will bring her back. She followed the small footprints through the white pines until the voices of the wagons faded. The child stood beside a fallen branch, clutching a blue scarf with tears on her cheeks. Grace knelt several feet away. Your family is waiting. The girl ran to her. Grace wrapped the scarf around the child's shoulders and lifted her carefully. Behind them, the silver stones began going dark one by one. Grace blew the whistle once, then twice. Before she could sound the third call, A deep crack echoed across the basin. The western ridge had shifted. Through the trees, Alexander heard the second whistle and turned his horse toward the sound, but Luke caught his reins. The 4 wagons are still ahead. Alexander looked toward the disappearing eastern path, every instinct pulling him back. Grace had made him promise. He faced west again and urged the riders forward. On the eastern trail, Grace carried the child through rising snow as the final silver marker vanished beneath her feet. Then the map in her hand revealed a new line, one that had never appeared before. It led directly toward Alexander, but between them lay a path no ordinary traveler could see. Grace held the child close and followed the new silver line as it appeared across the map. The path was not marked by stones, wool tracks, or any trail she had studied. It moved through the forest like moonlight resting on snow, visible only when she looked past what her eyes expected to see. "Stay with me," she whispered. The girl tightened her arms around Grace's shoulders. Behind them, the eastern markers had vanished. Ahead, the hidden line curved between 2 cliffs where the wind had swept the ground clean. Grace stepped carefully. Every few yards, the silver route brightened beneath the red moon, then faded as if waiting for her choice. She understood. The moon path was responding to the bond, but it was not pulling her toward Alexander without consent. It revealed possibility. She still had to walk. On the western ridge, Alexander reached the 4 missing wagons just as the shelf began narrowing. Luke and the guides redirected the drivers toward an older supply cut while snow moved across the upper trail. No one was harmed, but the horses were frightened and the families confused. Alexander stayed until the final wagon entered the safe passage. Only then did the second whistle echo again through the valley, faint and distant. Luke looked east. That path disappeared. Alexander's hands tightened around the reins. "Grace is still there. You promised her." "I promised not to abandon these families." He watched the last wagon reach the basin. "They are safe now." He turned his horse toward the eastern cliffs. The bond beneath his ribs burned like a compass. It did not show him Grace's fear. It showed him her direction. Luke and 2 Silvercrest riders followed. Far below, Grace reached a narrow opening between the cliffs. The child began to cry quietly. "I cannot see the road." "Neither can I," Grace admitted. "But the map can." She placed the parchment against the stone wall. The silver line spread beyond the edge of the paper and appeared across the rock itself. An arch of pale light revealed an old passage hidden beneath layers of frost. Grace smiled despite her exhaustion. "There you are." The tunnel was wide enough for 1 person at a time. She entered with the child in her arms. The air inside was still and cold, but not dangerous. Moon symbols covered the walls, older than any pack crest. Some represented borders. Others represented promises. Near the center, Grace found 2 wolves drawn beside a road that divided and returned as one. Beneath them were words in an ancient script she could only partly translate. "No path may bind what choice is not joined." Grace stopped. The bond had not created the route because she belonged to Alexander. It had opened because both of them had chosen to protect others before reaching for each other. The truth settled warmly inside her. Outside the tunnel, Alexander reached the vanished eastern trail. There were no footprints, only wind-blown snow. Luke searched the ridge. There is nowhere else to go. Alexander dismounted and closed his eyes. The bond remained. Grace was alive. Close. He followed the pole toward a blank cliff wall and found the faint outline of the hidden arch. The silver symbols appeared when he placed one hand against the stone. The passage opened. He entered alone. Grace heard footsteps and turned, shielding the child by instinct. Alexander emerged from the darkness, snow across his shoulders and relief breaking through his controlled expression. He stopped several feet away. "Are you hurt?" "No." Grace shifted the tired child in her arms. "She needs her mother." Alexander approached only after Grace nodded. He took the girl carefully and carried her toward the tunnel entrance. Grace followed, but the map slipped from her hand. Alexander caught it before it touched the ground. The silver line between their names glowed once, brighter than before. "The path opened for you," he said. "For us," Grace replied. "But it did not choose for us." Alexander looked at her with quiet understanding. "Neither will I." They emerged into the basin where the rescued families waited. The child's mother ran forward and gathered her daughter into her arms. Relief moved through both rival packs. No one asked who deserved credit. Everyone was safe. By evening, all 7 wagons reached the southern road. Grace returned to Red Hollow beneath a sky clearing of red light. The gathering hall was full when the council called the final public hearing. Emily placed the original maps on the table. Evelyn presented the altered documents. Luke gave his complete testimony. Victoria admitted she had changed the symbols after Damon promised her the Luna title. Then the council treasurer produced records proving Damon had planned to claim Silvercrest land before winter. Damon stood beneath the same crest where he had called Grace useless. This time, no one lowered their eyes. The elders removed him from authority pending formal judgment and opened the border records to every pack member. Damon looked at Grace as the silver chain was taken from the council table. You brought my rival into our hall and destroyed everything. Grace stepped forward with Alexander beside her, silent as promised. No, she said. The truth entered this hall before he did. You simply believed no one would be brave enough to carry it. The final hearing ended beneath a pale morning sky. Damon Prescott no longer stood above Red Hollow. The council placed his authority under formal review, opened every border record, and appointed a temporary leadership group chosen by the pack. Victoria Lane surrendered the silver Luna chain without ceremony. Luke Bennett accepted responsibility for his silence and offered to help restore the maps he had allowed others to corrupt. Grace watched each decision from the center of the hall, but she felt no triumph. Justice did not sound like cheering. It sounded like locked cabinets opening, frightened witnesses speaking clearly, and ordinary people realizing they had always possessed the right to ask questions. Emily stood beside Evelyn near the map table, carefully arranging the original parchments beneath glass. When the last record was sealed, the girl approached Grace with a folded sheet of paper. I drew the safe road, she said. The lines were uneven, but every moon path symbol was correct. Grace smiled. You remembered the blue markers. You taught me. Those 3 words reached a place Damon's praise had never touched. Grace had spent years believing her worth depended on whether powerful people used what she created. Emily reminded her that knowledge could also be given freely and carried forward with kindness. At the eastern gate, the rescued families gathered before returning to their homes. One by one, they thanked Grace. She accepted their gratitude without lowering her eyes and without pretending the past had not happened. An elder offered her the silver red hollow badge Damon had once promised she would wear as Luna. Grace held it for a moment, then returned it. Place it in the public records, she said. Let the next generation remember that a title cannot replace respect. Damon stood several yards away beneath council supervision. Without his ceremonial coat and raised platform, he looked less like the man who had controlled the hall and more like someone waiting for the world to restore what his choices had taken. You betrayed your pack the moment you walked into Blackwell's arms, he said. Grace looked toward Alexander. He waited near the boundary stone, giving her enough space to answer alone. I did not betray Red Hollow when he caught me, she said. Red Hollow betrayed me when every honest voice chose silence. Damon glanced at the silver line still visible on the restored map. He only values you because of the bond. Grace felt the connection beneath her ribs, warm but unforced. He valued my truth before either of us understood the bond existed. She left Damon with no final insult. He had already lost the only thing he had demanded from her for years, the power to define what she believed about herself. Outside the gate, Alexander offered Grace the original Moonpath map. Silvercrest needs someone who understands routes our scholars cannot see, he said. I would like you to become Royal Moon Cartographer. Grace studied him. Is that an order from the king? It is an offer from a man who respects your work. And the bond. His silver-gray eyes softened. Still not an order. Snow moved gently across the road between them. For the first time, Grace could imagine a future without adjusting herself to fit another person's ambition. She could accept the position and refuse the relationship. She could explore the bond slowly. She could leave if respect ever became possession. Every choice remained hers. I accept the position, she said. Alexander nodded as though her work deserved celebration on its own. Then Grace stepped closer. And I choose to learn what this bond can become. He did not reach for her until she opened her hand. His fingers closed around hers carefully, with no claim beyond what she had offered. Together they traveled to Silvercrest, where Grace received her own map room overlooking the northern valley. Emily visited each month to study under her. Evelyn helped preserve the ancient tunnel symbols. Luke sent corrected border records and reports showing that Red Hollow's new council had opened every safe route to public review. Weeks became months. Grace and Alexander walked the palace roads, shared quiet meals, and learned that trust was built through small permissions honored every day. He never asked her to become smaller beside his throne. She never mistook gratitude for love. When the next full moon rose above Silvercrest, the hidden path on Grace's map appeared again, brighter and steadier than before. It no longer ran from Red Hollow to Alexander. It began beneath Grace's own name, crossed open land, and divided into countless possible roads. Alexander stood beside her and asked, "Which one do you want?" Grace looked at the man who had caught her when she fell, but never asked her to remain dependent on his arms. Then she chose the road leading forward. The rival Alpha's embrace had never been her escape. It had simply been the first place where no one asked her to become less.